Welcome to another deep dive, everyone. Today we'll be exploring the fascinating world of cybersecurity and IT security standards.
Yeah, it's a pretty crucial area these days.
It's like venturing into a jungle out there, but luckily today we have the tools we need to protect ourselves and our valuable information.
Exactly. And speaking of tools, we'll be drawing insights from some really interesting sources, ISO standards documents, practical guides, all sorts of things. We're going to get a real well-rounded view.
And you know what's interesting? We're going to be diving into details that you might not even think of as security measures, like, did you know that a clean desk policy can actually play a big role?
Oh yeah, we'll be unpacking that and a whole lot more.
I'm ready to dive in. So first things first, why should we even care about cybersecurity essentials? Why is this such a big deal these days?
Well, think about it. In today's digital world, everything is connected. And that means every organization, no matter how big or small, no matter what industry, it's a potential target.
Yeah, that's true.
We all hear about those data breaches, right? And those can be devastating. Financial losses, reputational damage, legal issues, you name it.
And sometimes those breaches even disrupt essential services like hospitals or power grids.
It's definitely not something to take lightly.
So, okay, cybersecurity is clearly important. But how do we actually go about protecting ourselves? I mean, where do we even start?
That's where IT security standards come into play. They're like, well, imagine you're building a house.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
You wouldn't just start throwing bricks together, right? You'd need a blueprint, some guidelines to make sure everything is structurally sound.
Yeah, a solid foundation.
Exactly. So IT security standards are kind of like that blueprint for cybersecurity. They're a set of best practices and guidelines that help organizations establish and maintain secure systems.
So they provide a framework, a structure for managing risks, implementing controls, making sure we're in compliance with regulations, all that good stuff.
Absolutely. It's about taking a systematic and comprehensive approach to security rather than just reacting to threats as they pop up.
Right, being proactive instead of reactive.
Exactly.
So what are some of the big names in the IT security standards world? What should we be paying attention to?
Well, two of the most prominent ones you'll come across are ISO EEC 27001 and the NIST Cybersecurity Framework.
Okay, those ring a bell.
These are valuable for organizations of all shapes and sizes across different industries.
You mentioned ISO 27001. Isn't that considered like the gold standard, the holy grail of information security management systems?
Yeah, you could say that. It's widely recognized and respected.
But before we go any further, can we just quickly define what an ISMS actually is? For those who might not be familiar.
Of course, ISMS stands for Information Security Management System. It's essentially a structured approach to managing information security risks.
Okay, so that makes sense.
And ISO 27001 outlines all the requirements for establishing, implementing, maintaining, and constantly improving an ISMS. It's not a one-and-done type of deal.
Got it. So it's not just about having the latest antivirus software or a fancy firewall. It's about a much broader, more holistic approach to security, right?
Right. It covers a wide spectrum from risk assessment and treatment to things like physical security, controlling who has access to what, how you handle incidents when they occur.
Okay, that's pretty comprehensive. But you also mentioned the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. How does that fit into the picture? How is it different from ISO 27001?
So the NIST Cybersecurity Framework was developed by the U.S. National Institute of Standards and Technology. It's a voluntary framework, unlike ISO 27001, which has specific requirements.
So more of a set of guidelines.
Exactly. It's very flexible, and organizations can really tailor it to their own specific needs and circumstances.
Got it.
So while ISO is about building that formal ISMS, NIST is more focused on taking a risk-based approach, figuring out what your biggest vulnerabilities are, and tackling those first.
So in a way, organizations can choose which framework best suits their goals and resources.
Absolutely. Both can be incredibly valuable tools for bolstering cybersecurity. It depends on what you're looking for. ISO gives you that structure, those clear-cut requirements, while NIST offers more flexibility and guidance on how to manage those tricky risks.
Okay, I see. So speaking of risk management, can you tell us a little bit more about its role in all of this? It seems to be a recurring theme.
Oh, it's absolutely crucial. Risk management is the backbone of cybersecurity. It's about proactively identifying those potential threats and vulnerabilities, figuring out how likely they are to happen and what kind of impact they could have if they did.
Basically knowing your enemy, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then it's about taking steps to reduce those risks, to mitigate the potential damage. But it's not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process. You constantly have to be evaluating, reassessing, and adjusting your strategies as needed.
That makes sense because the threat landscape is constantly evolving.
It is, yeah. It's like a constantly moving target.
So it's not just about putting out fires, but about anticipating them and preventing them in the first place.
That's a great way to put it. You got to be thinking a few steps ahead, like in a chess game.
All right, so we've got these frameworks, we've got risk management. But how does an organization actually put all this into practice? Where do they even begin?
Well, the very first step is to know what you're protecting, right? Understand your assets, your sensitive information, where it's stored, how it's processed. You need to have a clear picture of that.
Okay, so step one is knowing what's at stake.
Exactly. Then you've got to figure out who might be after that information, identify those potential threats, both internal and external, and how they might try to get their hands on it. We're talking about hackers, phishing scams, malware, social engineering tactics, all that fun stuff.
So you're basically doing reconnaissance, figuring out what you're protecting and who or what might try to steal it.
Precisely. And you've got to understand those potential attack vectors, how they might try to exploit your systems, trick your employees, all of that. That's key.
Okay, so once you've identified the risks, what happens next? How do you actually address them?
That's where risk assessment comes in. You have to analyze each risk, figure out how likely it is to happen and what kind of impact it would have if it did. That helps you prioritize which risks are the most critical and need immediate attention.
So you're essentially figuring out which fires to put out first.
Exactly. And then you come up with a plan, a risk treatment plan,
Okay.
and that outlines what you're going to do to mitigate each risk. Sometimes it involves implementing security controls like, access controls, firewalls, intrusion detection systems, that kind of thing. But it could also involve developing policies and procedures, maybe for how employees handle data or training programs to raise awareness about cybersecurity threats and best practices.
It seems like creating a security-aware culture within the organization is a huge part of this.
It is, yeah. People are often the weakest link, unfortunately. You can have all the technology in the world, but if someone clicks on a phishing link or leaves their password out in the open, it can all be for nothing.
So it's about educating employees, making them aware of the risks, teaching them how to spot suspicious activity and how to report it, basically empowering them to be that first line of defense.
Exactly. And it's not just about technical skills. It's about creating a culture where everyone feels responsible for security.
A culture of shared responsibility.
Right, where people feel comfortable speaking up if they see something that seems off, no matter how small it might seem.
So it sounds like we've covered quite a bit already, from the basics of IT security standards to the importance of risk management, incident response, the human element of cybersecurity. I feel like we've only scratched the surface, though.
We have, but there's so much more to explore.
I'm ready for more.
And before we get too deep into the technical weeds, I think it's important to remember that cybersecurity is not just about implementing some fancy, complex tech solutions.
Yeah.
It's really about fostering a culture of security where everyone in the organization, from the top down, understands their role in protecting sensitive information.
Right. It's like you can have all the firewalls and intrusion detection systems money can buy, but if your employees are clicking on phishing links or leaving their passwords written down on sticky notes, it's all for nothing.
Exactly. That's why security awareness training is so crucial.
Yeah.
It's about giving your employees the knowledge they need to make smart decisions to recognize potential threats like those phishing scams, malware, the usual suspects.
So basically empowering them to be the first line of defense.
Precisely. And it goes beyond just the technical know-how. It's about creating an environment where everyone feels a sense of responsibility for security, where they can report potential issues without fear of being blamed or getting in trouble.
Right. A culture of trust and shared responsibility where everyone's looking out for each other.
Exactly. Now, going back to those frameworks we discussed earlier, ISO 27001 and the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, they both offer guidance on implementing specific security controls.
Can you give us a few examples of what those controls might actually look like in practice? How do they translate into real-world actions?
Sure. One that comes up a lot is access control. This is all about making sure that only the right people have access to the right information and systems.
Okay.
It can involve things like strong passwords, multi-factor authentication, where you need more than just a password to log in, and the principle of least privilege.
The principle of what?
Least privilege, that means users only have the bare minimum permissions they need to do their jobs.
Oh, right, right. So if someone's account does get compromised, the damage is limited.
Exactly. Another important one is encryption. That's basically scrambling data, so even if someone intercepts it, they can't read it without the decryption key.
So it's like putting your sensitive information in a locked safe.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. So you have access control, that's about who can get in, and then encryption, that's about protecting the data itself. But there's a whole bunch of other controls too, like network security measures, things like firewalls and intrusion detection systems. Then there's physical security to protect your servers and equipment, and of course data backup and recovery procedures. That's super important for business continuity in case of a disaster, a fire or a flood or something.
Wow, there's a lot to think about.
There is, but the good news is these frameworks really provide a roadmap. They help you tackle all these different aspects of cybersecurity in a systematic way.
That's reassuring. Now, we talked a bit about incident response earlier. Could you maybe go into more detail about what an effective incident response plan actually looks like? What are the key components?
Absolutely. An incident response plan basically spells out what an organization should do when a security incident happens, like a data breach or a cyber attack. It usually includes procedures for how to detect incidents, how to report them, how to contain the damage and eradicate the threat, how to recover affected systems and data, and importantly, how to learn from the incident so you can prevent similar things from happening again.
It's like a fire drill, but for cybersecurity?
Yeah, exactly. It's all about having a clear plan in place so everyone knows what to do when that alarm bell rings, so to speak. That way, you can respond quickly and effectively.
Makes sense. So far, we've mainly been talking about internal threats and vulnerabilities. But what about external threats? Those cyber attacks coming from outside the organization. How do companies protect themselves from those?
That's a huge part of cybersecurity, too, of course. Organizations need to have strong perimeter defenses to stop unauthorized access to their networks and systems in the first place.
So things like firewalls and intrusion detection systems.
Yep, those are essential. It's like building a wall around your digital assets.
And making sure that wall is high enough and strong enough.
Right, and just as important is keeping those defenses up to date.
Because the attackers are constantly finding new ways to get in.
They are, and they're getting more sophisticated all the time. Regular security updates and patches are crucial. They help close those vulnerabilities that attackers could exploit. Otherwise, it's like leaving the back door wide open.
It's like making sure the locks on your doors are strong and that you're keeping up with the latest security tech.
Exactly. But it's not just about the technology. It's also important to be aware of those social engineering tactics that attackers might use to try and trick employees.
Like those phishing emails or phone calls that look like they're from IT support.
Oh yeah, those are classics. Security awareness training really helps employees recognize those kinds of attacks and avoid falling victim to them. It's all about creating a culture of vigilance where everyone's on the lookout for anything that seems suspicious.
So again, it goes back to the idea that cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility, not just the IT department.
Absolutely. Everyone in the organization plays a role in keeping that data safe.
Okay, so we've talked about IT security standards, risk management, incident response planning, security awareness training. We've covered a lot.
We have, but it really is just the tip of the iceberg. Cybersecurity is a constantly evolving field. There's always something new to learn.
True. But what I'm taking away from this is that it's not just about technology. It's about people, processes, and culture. It's about being proactive, being prepared, and being aware.
That's a great summary. It's about understanding your risks, putting the right controls in place, and fostering that security-aware environment we talked about.
Right. So where do we go from here? What can organizations do to actually put all this into action and really strengthen their security posture? Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners are thinking the same thing. Like, okay, this is all good information, but what can we actually do with it? How can we take this back to our organizations and make a real difference?
Well, the first step is really to take a good look at your current security posture, kind of do an assessment of where things stand right now. Look at your security controls, your policies, your procedures, and ask yourself some key questions. Are they up to date? Are they actually effective? Do they align with industry best practices and those frameworks we talked about, like ISO 27001 or the NIST Cybersecurity Framework?
So it's like taking inventory and seeing what you've got and maybe where the gaps are.
Exactly. Once you have a clear understanding of where you're at, then you can start to develop a plan for improvement.
Okay.
And that might involve implementing some new security controls, maybe updating existing policies that are a bit outdated, or providing training to your employees to make sure everyone's on the same page.
Right. Okay, so let's break that down a bit. What are some specific, tangible steps that organizations can take to really level up their security game?
One area I always emphasize is access control. You want to make sure you have strong password policies in place, no more password 123 kind of stuff.
Yeah, definitely not.
And consider implementing multi-factor authentication, especially for those really sensitive systems and accounts. It adds an extra layer of protection.
Right, so even if someone gets their hands on a password, they can't get in without that second factor.
Exactly. And don't forget about the principle of least privilege. Remember, we talked about that.
Yeah, giving users only the access they absolutely need to do their job.
Right. It really helps limit the potential damage if an account does get compromised.
So it's about being strategic, really thinking about who has access to what information and why they need it.
Exactly. Another crucial step is making sure all your software and systems are patched, up to date with the latest security updates.
I feel like we hear about that all the time, but it's easy to fall behind.
It is, but it's so important. Those updates often contain fixes for known vulnerabilities. If you don't install them, you're basically leaving yourself wide open to attack.
So it's like locking your doors but leaving the windows open.
Yeah, pretty much. And it's not just reacting to those updates as they come out. Regularly scanning for vulnerabilities is key. There are tools that can help you do that.
Right, so you can stay one step ahead.
Exactly. And let's not forget about data protection itself.
Oh yeah, that's the whole point, right?
Encrypt sensitive data both when it's being transmitted and when it's stored. That way, even if it falls into the wrong hands, it's unreadable without the decryption key.
Okay, so encryption is like that extra layer of security for the data itself.
Exactly. And you can also implement data loss prevention solutions. Those can help prevent sensitive information from leaving your organization's control, whether it's intentional or accidental.
So layering those defenses, right?
Absolutely. And I know I keep saying this, but it's worth repeating. Cybersecurity isn't a one-time thing. It's a journey, an ongoing process. You constantly have to be reviewing and updating your security controls, policies, procedures.
Because the threat landscape is constantly changing.
Yeah, it's a never-ending race, in a way. You always got to be one step ahead.
Okay, so we've talked about technology processes, but what about the people side of things? We touched on security awareness training earlier, but how can organizations really foster that culture of security we keep talking about?
Well, investing in good security awareness training is a great start. Teach your employees how to spot phishing scams, malware, social engineering tactics. The more they know, the better equipped they'll be to make those smart decisions.
Right, knowledge is power.
It really is, and make sure they know how to report suspicious activity.
So they feel comfortable speaking up if something seems off.
Exactly, and when they do report something, take it seriously. Investigate it, address it. That shows everyone that you're taking security seriously, that it's a priority.
Right, it reinforces that culture of shared responsibility.
Absolutely, and we can't forget about incident response planning. Even with the best defenses, there's always a chance something could slip through, so you need to be prepared.
Yeah, like having that fire drill plan in place.
Exactly. A well-rehearsed plan can make all the difference in minimizing the damage and getting your organization back on track quickly.
Okay, so to wrap things up, it sounds like cybersecurity is a multifaceted challenge. It's not just about technology. It's about people, processes, culture.
It really is, and it's an ongoing effort. You have to stay vigilant, stay informed, and keep adapting to the ever-evolving threat landscape.
That's a great point. It's not just about checking off a box and saying, okay, we're secure now. It's about continuous improvement, always striving to be better.
Exactly. And remember, cybersecurity isn't just an IT issue, it's a business issue. It affects everyone.
Right. It's about protecting your organization's reputation, its assets, its ability to function and thrive.
Absolutely. By taking cybersecurity seriously and taking a comprehensive approach, organizations can really reduce their risk and build a more secure future for themselves.
That's a great message to end on. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing all these valuable insights.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And to our listeners, we hope you found this deep dive into the world of cybersecurity informative and empowering. Remember, knowledge is power. By staying informed and proactive, we can all play a part in creating a safer and more secure digital world. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and keep learning.